What if the person that you used to roll your eyes at turned out to be one of the most sincere, admirable figures of a generation? This week, we're talking about the crocodile hunter himself, Steve Irwin, a man who has become both a national treasure and a global meme. From growing up surrounded by snakes and crocs at his parents' wildlife park on the Sunshine Coast to becoming the internationally beloved face of nature conservation that practically built Animal Planet, Irwin's story is wild in every sense. But what's even more interesting is how in death and through the power of the internet and meme culture, the image of Steve Irwin has become synonymous with all that is good in this world. This is particularly interesting for myself and John, and how our feelings towards Steve and the Irwin family have changed over the years. Because for a long time, because we grew up in an era of irony and sarcasm, Steve's hyper-earnest enthusiasm was almost unbearable. But now, as two geriatric millennials, it feels refreshing, necessary, and vital. Today, we'll revisit his legacy, unpack that shift, and offer some completely unsolicited advice to his kids, Bindi and Robert, as they carry on the Irwin brand. And if you stay with us until the end, you might even find yourself rethinking what sincerity, authenticity, and genuine passion actually look like, and why maybe we could all take a leaf out of Steve Irwin's khaki-coloured book and use a little bit more of that Steve Irwin energy ourselves. John Maloney, I would like to welcome you to the Steve Irwin Don't Praise the Machine episode, live from Australia Zoo on the Sunshine.
Exactly. live from this. Yeah, we got a background of the I should have set that up. Done a backdrop of the beautiful Glasshouse Mountains in the Sunshine Coast hinterland where the Australia Zoo is.
So you've spent a little bit of time in Queensland, John.
So my story, I think you'll find, overlaps with Steve's in a number of almost frighteningly uncanny ways. Yeah, so I was recently in Far North Queensland on the beautiful shores of Port Douglas and its famous 4 Mile Beach, famously developed by the late great Australian con artist Christopher Skase, and now a popular tourist hotspot in Far North Queensland. And it's beautiful. It's kind of long stretches of beach and rainforest, and near the Daintree rainforest, which is one of the biggest and oldest rainforests in the world up there in Far North Queensland. And if you go off the coast, of course, you can visit the Great Barrier Reef, or you can go to the kind of inner reef where we went on that trip, to a place called the Low Isles, and that consists of 2 islands, one of which is called Low Island. And so it's probably 2 or 3 days into the trip to Port Douglas, which was only a month or so ago, that I was confronted with Steve's legacy in a very poignant way, because I went out to Low Island. We went snorkeling and saw some beautiful Australian natural wonders. We saw some of the some parts of the reef, some coral. We saw a turtle. We saw an octopus. We saw a reef shark. We even saw some whales on the way in, and it was kind of like it was a real feast for the senses. But then when we went into Low Island, we did a little, which is a very, very small island with just like a caretaker's cottage on it. It's only a couple of hectares. We did a little walking tour of the island. And I have to admit, I was kind of off doing my own thing, not really paying attention. But I did kind of sidle up to the walking tour at one point when the tour guide was talking near the caretaker's cottage at this little shed. And she said this was where, sadly, the great Steve Irwin passed away, because he had been he'd been attacked by a vicious un-Australian stingray off the coast of Low Island, and they'd taken him in to try and treat him, and unfortunately hadn't succeeded, and he'd passed away. And the tourists who were on this trip, I mean, there was us, there were some other kind of non-Australians though, but everyone knew, no matter what part of the world they were from. There were some Germans there, some Americans, etc. They all knew who Steve Irwin was, of course, and they all felt slightly moved by this revelation, as did I, listening, which made me think, Steve is one of those people who, as you alluded to in your characteristically articulate introduction, is kind of due for a reinterpretation and a revival, because it's kind of like when you form a view of something at a particular time in your life, and then you don't really think about it after that, and you just in the back of your mind think, well, yeah, Steve, for me, he's always been in the kind of dickhead basket. But in recent years, I've developed a kind of growing sense of affection towards him. And so I wanted to explore that with you, because I know you've gone through a similar journey, revisit the man himself, talk about, why is it that our perception of him has changed? And as you said, what's next for the Irwin story in the form of his children, Robin and Bindi, and to a lesser extent, his wife, the widow, Terry.
Yeah.
And Australians, I'm sure some of you have already started to go on this journey, but you might enjoy hearing about our sense of it. Non-Australians, I guess it's kind of interesting to get a sense of what it was like for Australians during the peak years of Irwin mania, and when crocodile hunting went from just a pastime that some people participated in to something that everyone did. Al and I had to do crocodile hunting classes after school. It was a bit over the top for a few years there. So Steve, to give you a bit of a sense, he was born in Ferntree Gully, which is a suburb of Melbourne, in the city where I now speak to you. And in 1962, his father had been a plumber, but was a kind of amateur herpetologist, which is someone who's into amphibians and reptiles, named Bob or Robert. And his mother was a maternity nurse. I think her name was Bev. Classic Australian suburban family. Many suburban Australian families have a herpetologist somewhere in the offing.
And a Bev.
And a Bev, exactly, making school lunches for the kids. And so, yeah, he's born in Ferntree Gully, and then as a child he moves to the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, which is an area I'm quite familiar with because my grandparents used to live up there in a town called Caloundra, which it turns out is where Steve went to high school. And so he attends Caloundra State High School. He's living up in the Sunshine Coast, and his parents start a reptile and fauna park up there called the Queensland Reptile and Fauna Park, sensibly enough, which Steve is kind of involved in as their son. And taking after his father, I guess, he's kind of really into reptiles and nature from a very, very young age. When he's 6 years old, his sixth birthday present is a scrub python, and which is a type of snake native to Queensland, and they're absolutely enormous. This one was about 4 meters long, apparently. A 12-foot scrub python. They're basically a form of boa constrictor, and they strangle their prey with their muscles. But that didn't bother tiny little Tarzan Steve at age 6. He had his pet scrub python. Then apparently, I mean, this sounds a bit apocryphal, but several sources I've read say that he first wrestled a crocodile at age 9.
Okay.
Apparently under the supervision of his father. I'm not sure what good supervision does when you're attacking a saltwater crocodile. I think he just was made a lucky escape there. And he worked as a volunteer in his youth for the Queensland government, relocating problem crocodiles, which might strike people as a strange phenomenon. I don't know whether American listeners might relate to this, whether alligators in America are a similar problem. I mean, I know I've heard stories of kind of alligators taking up residence in sewers and stuff in parts of America needing to be removed. But basically what happened in Australia, as a bit of a side note, is that by the time of the early 1970s, hunting of crocodiles had basically just about caused their near extinction. There was only a few thousand thought to be left. And then there were hunting bans introduced all across the north of Australia. So in the Northern Territory, which is a kind of a quasi-state, in Queensland and in, I think, Western Australia, there was no need to bring one in here in Victoria because there's no crocodiles. But that was in the kind of early 70s. And since then, so by the time Steve's kind of coming of age, that they started to rebound pretty rapidly. and so there were lots of crocodiles. Now there's thought to be about 30,000 in Queensland alone. So they've done very well in light of the hunting ban, so much so that people in Queensland, it's a kind of a hot topic whether or not they should be allowed to return to hunting. They're a bit like the whales are to the Japanese, crocodiles are to people in far north Queensland. They resent not being able to observe their rituals of killing crocodiles. So anyway, Steve takes over the management of this park in 1991. And then the following year, he meets Terry, his wife. And she is, as people who've watched The Crocodile Hunter will know, she's American. She's from Eugene, Oregon. And so it's from one of the lawless states in America where the National Guard has had to be introduced recent months. I don't know whether she's personally complicit in its degradation. But in any case, she had a classic sort of Tiger King-esque story, it sounds like. Her father was a trucker and he would come home with kind of injured animals that he'd found on the road, so he says. And then they started a kind of wildlife rehabilitation, but also, kind of money-making center in Oregon, I think. And in the early 90s, 1992, she's doing a tour of Australia to get a sense of like what's going on down here. Obviously, we're at the cutting edge of exploiting injured exotic animals, and she wants to know best practice. And so she goes to the zoo, then still named the Queensland Reptile and Fauna Park Zoo, but what would become the famous Australia Zoo in due course, about 6 years after that. And then she goes to see one of Stephen's high-energy croc wrestling performances, which is a bit kind of, I'm sure everyone's seen some of it. He gets real close. He holds a piece of kind of raw meat over this giant animal. He talks about its majestic beauty. Maybe he kind of fondles its scales a bit, and then it snaps on this piece of meat, and he, kind of maybe he jostles it a bit to get it to try and eat him, and then runs out in the nick of time. And that's the kind of general vibe. And love at first sight, apparently, between Terry and Steve Irwin, or Terry Raines, as she then was, and Steve Irwin. They got engaged just 4 months later. And when they get married, instead of like a normal couple going to, a resort, kind of White Lotus-y situation, they go crocodile trapping. And again, I think kind of getting rid of problem crocodiles, or possibly just finding crocodiles that might find a home in the zoo, in the Irwin Zoo. And they get a cameraman to follow them around and make this into a documentary. And this is their honeymoon. But it becomes this documentary that ends up being the kind of first episode of Crocodile Hunter. So it first screens, I think, on Australian TV in 1992 on Channel 10. But then 4 years later, Animal Planet gets started in the US. So it starts on the 1st of June, 1996. And this show, The Crocodile Hunter, gets kicked off on Animal Planet with this episode. This documentary is the first episode. And yeah, I mean, Steve becomes, for Animal Planet, what Seinfeld was at the same time for NBC, really. He's like the reason that network exists, and he's able to make a lot of money. And Crocodile Hunter keeps going all the way through until 2007, which is a year after Steve dies. It's the second longest running program on any Discovery Communications network, behind Mythbusters, which many of our listeners and viewers will remember fondly. And so, yeah, him and Terry make it big as a result of the Animal Planet screening Crocodile Hunter, and then a bunch of spin-offs. So you get Croc Files, which runs from 1999 to 2001. You get the Crocodile Hunter Diaries. I'm sure we've all seen that, 2002 through to 2006. And even after Steve passes away, you get a bunch of kind of, tribute episodes. And I think there's a short, maybe not that short running, like 3 or 4 years, kind of reality show which focuses on the surviving members of the Irwin family, Terry, Robert, and Bindi. So that's the kind of broad brushstrokes tale of Steve Irwin and his rise. But it's interesting to, that's only part of that's the kind of mechanics of it. But then there's the sort of pop culture side of it. I mean, he really did become, particularly in America more than anywhere else, more probably than in Australia, he became this kind of cultural icon. So he's on, he's doing his tours, promoting visits to Australia Zoo, promoting this stuff on the Animal Planet. But because he's such a kind of live wire, he's so sort of guileless and earnest and excitable and, loves nature and loves animals so much. So he's exactly the kind of guy that, is perfect for the kind of late night talk show scene, because you could just come on and he'll talk charmingly about crocs, and maybe you'll be able to like bring some exotic animal into the studio and he'll show you what it's about. And so there's and maybe we can actually show you, there's a relatively famous segment that he does on the Late Show with Conan O'Brien, where he's wrestling a kind of toy crocodile in a kind of above ground pool. And then I think he ends up wrestling Conan. So you might want to put that to our viewers, those lucky enough to be watching on YouTube. Al, that's the second of the links that I've just sent.
Or they can have a listen in, as if you're listening, you'll get a sense of this as well. Let me just blank this in.
Work together, yes, you bet. So if you could be my couple tonight, let's do it. Yeah, all right, let's go. Let's just do this very quickly and seriously. Now, we should point out to people, our show couldn't afford a real crocodile. Stop giggling, it's very sad, more sad than funny. And so what we have here is a rubber simulation of a crocodile.
Yeah, that's definitely a saltwater crocodile. As you can see, it's over 6 feet.
Do I have to be wearing shorts for this?
Well, no.
Excellent. Show me what to do. We're running out of time.
Well, let's see. First off, you've got to locate the croc. So you go out at night.
It's right there in the kiddie pool.
It is. There it is.
It's in the kiddie pool.
Okay. You happy enough? Right.
Yeah.
Shirt off.
All right.
You are keen.
All right.
You pick it up with the spotlight. You see its eye shine.
I see it. Its eyes are shining.
I'll be up the front of the boat.
I'm at the back of the boat.
You're driving the boat.
I'm driving the boat.
Hold the spotlight up over my shoulder.
Right, okay.
Okay, here we go. As soon as I get within range, I'm going to dive off, but I'm going to need backup. It's over 6 feet.
Okay.
Here we go, we're getting closer and
so
closer.
So I dive after you dive.
Once I restrain it by the neck, you take the tail end, man. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Hit it.
That's probably yeah, so that's the kind of wildfire, live wire antics that he was known for. And I don't know, like at the time, we've talked actually relatively recently on the show about our love of 90s late night. And I would have, had I seen that in my youth, I would have turned it off and gone, I can't bear to watch a nation disgrace itself on late night TV. I think that was an episode where, just to give you a sense of the kind of people he was rubbing shoulders with, you had Amy Sedaris on that episode and Andrew WK.
Andrew WK, man. I looked him up last week because he's sort of disappeared. And I was like, what's happened to Andrew WK?
Yeah. And then another episode of Conan, because they obviously loved him, and then they had him back, and he was with opposite Dolly Parton, who's apparently not in good health at the moment, but has also earned a place in my heart in recent years. Then he's on Oprah Winfrey Show, Larry King Live, Tonight Show with Jay Leno, etc. So they love him. And, obviously people are flocking to Australia Zoo. It becomes part of this kind of, if you come to Australia as an American, you're probably pretty likely, if you're up that way, to go to the Sunshine Coast and go to Australia Zoo. So he's beloved by Queenslanders because he's putting them on the map, putting the Sunshine Coast on the map. And yeah, of course, everyone knows how it ends. He unfortunately passes away in 2006 after being stung by a stingray, or I think kind of stabbed in the chest by a stingray. And so, yeah, I mean, I kind of think, well, what is it that I mean, I watch that now and, you know, I quite enjoy it, whereas I previously found it almost unwatchable. There's another clip that I gave you which kind of shows his more earnest side, and particularly since becoming a father, I've watched it and I felt like, man, that really is quite touching. We might also go to that because I think it's sort of contrast between his more showman-like persona and his kind of genuine, more private, even though he's still on camera, but he's kind of more personal persona.
This is him with Bindi?
Give that a look. It's with him with baby Bindi, and it's the day that his son Robert is born.
I got some news.
Yeah?
We're not really going home. Do you know where we're going?
Where?
We're going to the hospital. Do you know why?
Why?
Mummy just had a baby.
Really?
Yeah. She's had a little baby boy, and his name's Robert Clarence Irwin. And he's only that big.
She already has it.
Yes, it's come out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm more excited than Mommy and you.
I can believe that.
How do you know it's a boy?
They know.
Did you check?
They're not born with clothes on, Bindi.
How come? How long are you going to sleep for? I think by the way he is, I'll call him Brian.
That's super
His
cute.
name's Robert.
Steve.
And that boy grew up to be on Dancing with the Stars,
Exactly.
as did the entire Irwin family.
That's right. So yeah, that's a little snapshot. Al, tell me what your memories of Steve are. How you used to feel about him. Do you still hate him? Assuming that you did hate him. Why
Well,
did you hate him?
I think-
Why do you not hate him anymore? If you don't anymore?
I think probably the important thing here, John, is probably our feelings towards him are quite unique to us being Australian. So I think he was always beloved internationally for the most part. I think that Americans always loved him because he almost has a kind of and it's almost like an American way about him. They're
it does.
extremely open to positivity. They don't have the tall poppy syndrome. Americans are all about passion, hard on your sleeve, just expressing your exuberance for life. They're not sort of bitter, cynical Australians who tell you not to get too big for your boots and why you're being all big and loud. And of course, the other thing is that he represented to us a sort of caricature of an Australian that we as geriatric millennials who were, like you were mentioning or alluding to, you know, we were fans of Seinfeld, we were fans of grunge, we loved The Simpsons. Seeing this representation of an Australian person on the international stage, I mean, I don't even remember really him being that present on Australian screens, to be honest. I knew of him because he had become an international phenomenon. He was like Foster's Lager in that he was a thing that was Australian, but nobody in Australia was paying much attention to him. In at least in my world, I kind of knew, he's that Crocodile Hunter wrestler guy who has become huge on those nature channels on cable television in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm not sure that he was that interesting to Australians at the time because he was almost like, he kind of embodies a little bit of, it's the same title, isn't it? Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, here's another bloody here's another. Why is it that we can only export crocodile men to the world?
Exactly.
Like, they're only in one very specific part. There are these very specific parts of Australia, the crocodiles.
Yeah.
And yet that's just what we're known for.
And our part of Australia was very much a kind of urbanized, you know, the opposite of somewhere where you might encounter, let alone hunt a crocodile or wrestle with one. You know, like I didn't.
Yeah.
That wasn't that kind of, you know, cork hat and, dryser bone raincoat and kind of outdoorsy, earthy sort of, hyper masculine stereotype really did not ring true with either what I encountered in Australia or what I particularly wanted Australia to represent itself as on the international stage. And, that kind of the idea that you'd watch, I remember watching The Simpsons and they had that kind of Australian episode, which again, now I can watch it and sort of laugh and find it quite kind of just genuinely funny. At the time, I think it was tinged with resentment because it had this sort of hyper ochre sort of stupidity to it that, we were all a bunch of kind of crazed former convicts living in the middle of nowhere and there was like killer koalas and so on. But I think as a young person, feeling isolated from the sort of epicenters of popular culture, it fed into that sense of, being a backwater, being somewhere that's a bit of a laughing stock, and then kind of debasing ourselves by playing up to that through people like Steve and Crocodile Dundee, who I haven't gone back and watched the Crocodile Dundee films. Maybe this is part of a general appropriation for me of hyper Australian ochre culture on the global stage, and I'm going to love all of that stuff now, but I don't think so. I think there's something particular to Steve that I watch those clips, and as you say, we've talked a little bit about like Australian masculinity, Australia's love of irony and kind of, sort of emotional reticence among Australian men. And I kind of can't help but admire the fact that Steve, despite being this, in some ways, this very Australian masculine stereotype, was also extremely kind of theatrical, extremely emotionally open, loved his wife, loved his kids, would talk all about his feelings, would sometimes cry on camera.
That's right.
All these things that I've come to, think Australian people should be more like, basically. Bit more positive, bit more sort of, emotionally rounded. And he also apparently didn't smoke, didn't drink, which is kind of quite sort of subversive for Australian masculine type. And I guess one of the things that I like about him generally, whether or not he's Australian, is just that sort of sincerity that people admired at the time, but I was too much of an angry young man to perhaps admire. But I think one of the reasons that, when you read about him now, there's quite a few sort of retrospectives here and there that have been written about him and his effect. But, he came obviously at a time when there was sort of peak cynicism, even in America. There was that kind of Seinfeld grunge, very sort of, it was trendy to be kind of disaffected and indifferent. And, you had movies coming out like your kind of Ghost World, just glorifying not giving a shit about anything and being a sort of monotone slacker. And Steve was like the polar opposite of that. Everything was kind of childlike enthusiasm and, this kind of genuine love of life and kind of affection for everything that he was doing, and just completely hard on sleeve. So that's kind of, and I guess the other thing is now as an adult who I suppose is almost at the age where Steve was when he died, I kind of think, fuck, that's a pretty massive accomplishment to come from the sort of backwaters of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland and then be on Oprah Winfrey and Jay Leno. And he obviously, you can't just be a kind of silly, clownish figure. He obviously had some nous and some genuine talent and something that a lot of other people would have tried to have but didn't have to the same degree. And even when he died, and looking back now at the kind of way that he's remembered, I mean, I kind of wrote down a few people who had paid tribute to him after he died, like David Attenborough, David Suzuki, Justin Timberlake, who was,
wow.
I mean, getting praise from Justin Timberlake in the mid 2000s was really top of the pile.
It was better than getting knighted by the Queen.
Exactly. I mean, these days, get a pleasant. I'll probably get Justin Timberlake saying nice things about me when I die, and I wouldn't give two shits about it. But 2006, I would have been like, that's quite an accomplishment. And as recently as 2018, apparently he got a Hollywood Walk of Fame star, which is amazing because that's 12 years after he died.
Did you know that there is a snail species named after him?
Oh, wow. There you go.
I'm not shitting you, there's a snail species called Crikey Steve Irwini, it goes from Wikipedia, a species of air-breathing land snail and terrestrial something or other, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Mollusk in the family, blah, blah, blah. The specific name, Steve Irwini, is in memory of Australian wildlife expert Steve Irwin.
It sounds like something you would have used to call him as a joke.
I know. And then there was an asteroid named after him as well. The 57567 Crikey was named in his offer. But speaking of his sincerity, and I was just going to say, John, this is what separates him from Paul Hogan and Crocodile Dundee was not hard on his sleeve. He was not emotional. He was not crying on camera. He
very stoic.
So he was more stoic. But let's have a look at. But I think what's really important to mention is that, as I mentioned in the intro, Steve Irwin, his image has become synonymous with. He's up there with beloved internet figures like Mr. Rogers and these humans who, when you see them on screen, they instantly represent all that is good in this world.
Yeah.
People that have passed on.
Yeah.
Who have left behind a legacy that continues to inspire to this day. This is a very famous scene where he's been interviewed by famous Australian journalist Charles Woolley, and he's talking a little bit about why he does what he does. I think maybe Charles Woolley said to him, "Oh, you're so successful, you got so much money. You know, don't you just eat caviar? Don't you just want to chill out and eat caviar and bang hookers and make Terry watch?"
Yeah,
and
that's what Charles Woolley do with my riches.
That's what Charles Woolley do with with my journalism money, and this is what Steve Irwin says.
What good is a fast car, a flash house, and a gold-plated dunny to me? Absolutely no good at all. I've been put on this planet to protect wildlife and wilderness areas, which in essence is going to help humanity. I want to have the purest oceans. I want to be able to drink water straight out of that creek. I want to stop the ozone layer. I want to save the world. And you know, money's great. I can't get enough money. And you know what I'm going to do with it? I'm going to buy wilderness areas with it. Every single cent I get goes straight into conservation.
And he did. He bought lots of land around the world in different places for conservation.
He did. Apparently, he didn't have a lot of him and Terry didn't have a lot of personal fortune, even though they were making tons of money at Australia Zoo. They did actually reinvest it a lot. They were, I think, trying to genetically engineer crocodiles to be more and more massive and dangerous. And and I guess the other thing that I did think this when I was in Port Douglas, having been all around the world since I was an angry teen yelling at the TV when Steve Irwin came on, and I go, it is kind of cool that we've got crocs and croc hunting men. Like, why not celebrate that? It's it is like, I mean, the Australian natural world is kind of something that I probably have since come to appreciate. But I think one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is that Steve's legacy hasn't quite been captured by his two children, Bindi and Robert, and it remains to be seen whether or not they will kind of become cultural icons in their own right. And I don't know about you, but it seems to me that the only one seriously in contention at this point is Robert, because Terry's always been a kind of slightly less charismatic. She was more kind of a supporting role in the Steve Irwin show, and she's a bit older now and just wants to chill. Bindi has always struck me as a little weird, And
She was, I mean, we were going to do a whole Bindi episode, and we didn't do it because it would have just been too nasty. I think she's a bit more normal now, Bindi, but I used to send you so many clips of Bindi Irwin when we were younger because it was so obvious that she had just been bred to be on a stage.
Yeah.
And every question that she got asked in interviews, you could see that as the question was being asked and she was nodding, that her brain was just searching for the 100 answers that she's allowed to give based on, and she would just be going, oh, which of my 100 answers can I answer this question? What's the closest answer that I can give? You know, somebody would ask her some question and then she would just go off she would just do her own talking point with this weird robot smile.
That kind of glassy
and I
eyes.
felt quite sorry for her because obviously she was just thrust into the spotlight. She had cameras on her as soon as she was born. She won Dancing with the Stars, didn't she? I
think she might have. And then she came back as a judge a few seasons later. And so she was on Dancing with the Stars, then was a guest judge. This is going back probably 10 years ago. Then she was partnering with SeaWorld. So she's done, and she was in a kind of fairly ill-fated, I think, Free Willy sequel. So she's done some things with her fame. And most recently she's been raising awareness of endometriosis.
That's right. I saw that.
She's had a series of surgeries, but she's also like carries a little bit of bitterness. Understandably, I mean, she lost her father at a young age, and she kind of did have that sort of, I don't know. It was like watching a kind of child whose parent is a pastor or something, like get up and preach at too young an age, and you're like, this feels unhealthy. And yeah, so she's kind of broken away from that a little bit, but I think probably in such a way that she maybe doesn't. I can see her kind of just not really wanting the spotlight and maybe carrying on a private life from here on. We'll see. I mean, she might surprise us. But Robert has always kind of had a little bit more like of a, I don't know, kind of a chill ease and an authenticity to him. That's, maybe that's just because he was younger and he's kind of not really part of that peak crocodile. He's too young to kind of be part of that, like, crocodile hunter mania, and so he's kind of just broken out on his own, although he too, as you alluded to earlier, is on this season, in fact, of Dancing with the Stars, with some absolute friends of the Don't Praise the Machine universe. Hilaria Baldwin, perhaps our most favourite celebrity, and Corey Feldman, maybe our second most favourite celebrity.
Corey Feldman is on Dancing with the Stars?
He's on Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, my God.
And Andy Richter. So you got Andy, Hilaria, Corey, and Robert Irwin carrying on his father's legacy. And I guess Dancing with the Stars is kind of used by people of Robert's profile. I mean, sometimes it's used by people who just want to stay in the headlines in any way they can, but sometimes it's used as a bit of a career-building project and, to sort of get a sense of how audiences like this person and what they make of them. And I feel like that's maybe what Robert is up to. So we might sort of see something more of him. The trouble is, cable TV is kind of on the way out. I'm not sure people are as interested as they once would have been in crocodile wrestling. But maybe there's a role for him as a kind of, environmentalism is still very much a thing. So he could kind of potentially make his name, and I suppose to an extent has made his name in that way. But I'd love to see Robert, not only on this show, but just in general, making a bit more of a name for himself, because he's kind of, he's been here and there, but he hasn't really got the same level of momentum behind him.
My sense of Robert is that he has quite a strong profile.
Okay.
So like, so I'm looking now at Robert Irwin Photography is what he calls his Instagram account.
Oh, right.
I guess he probably started it as like a photograph. He has 8.2 million followers
Really?
on on Instagram.
Yeah, okay.
And he's done a bunch of Australian tourism campaigns,
Yep.
I believe.
Yep.
And he's also a very hot piece of ass, if I do say so myself. I had not followed him. I had not followed him for a while,
Yeah.
and then I looked him up for this episode, and he's got to be in the gym every morning. He's totally cut. Like, there's a bunch of photographs of him. This is American. I think this must be American People magazine, John, where he is on the.
Yeah, he's been a bit He's been a bit sexed up lately, I've noticed.
So this is him in People magazine. If I can bring this up here. So this is like him on American People magazine.
There you go. I was born to be wild.
Oh, he's got a little kitten on his shoulder.
Beautiful.
He's in his. Let's just go through some of these. Here he is with his Dancing with the Stars co-star. He's all suited up. He's teaching his Dancing with the Stars co-star Aussie lingo. He's teaching her what the word root means. He's fallen in the mud. There he is with the fam, and that's Bindi's kid. So Bindi's got a little baby Bindi.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to
fam.
look out
That's
my
Bindi's.
grandparents' window at the Glasshouse Mountains, and now I too am a hot piece of ass. You might argue. There he is. Oh, is that his dancing partner? Yeah. Okay. With a snake.
And I think he's single. So
do you think
he's going to definitely? And here he is. Here he's on Good Morning America.
Pressure on you, but your sister has a special message for you. Check
Hey Robert, I am so excited that you are embarking on your Dancing with the Stars journey. Oh my goodness, after being on the show 10 years ago, my best advice is to just lean into the experience.
Thanks, Bendo. Thanks.
Even there, I'm like, I'm not really buying that. Can't you speak to your own brother without a script? I would say.
Yeah, exactly. She absolutely cannot. She's totally, hi, Bob. Hi, Robert. How are you? It's me, Bindi Irwin, your sister from Australia.
The Crocodile Hunter Jr. So there you go. And he's only 21. So he's I thought when I started talking about Steve that this was that the kids were kind of moving on a bit, but not at all. 21, he's just getting started. So he's got huge potential to be the next hot Australian export.
Yeah, he's also I've always quite liked Bob. Robert, I guess they call him. He seems to be quite a lovely ambassador for the nation of Australia, and also he just has just a sort of more natural way about him.
Do you know if he's living in? Has he gone over to the US? I mean, he's obviously there.
They all live in. My understanding is all the Irwins live in Australia, and then they go and spend time in the US when they're doing shows. So he's obviously living there now while he does Dancing with the Stars. Okay. I hope he wins dancing.
Yeah, I hope what happens is it turns out that he and Hilaria Baldwin have had an affair, and Alec has one of his classic outbursts and punches Robert in the face on the streets of Manhattan. That would be the kind of springboard money couldn't buy. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, so I'm happy once and for all to bury the hatchet, to kind of embrace Steve as someone who, as a younger man, I viewed as a mortal enemy, but now I think is part of the better part of one of the better angels of Australia's nature, you might say, one of our favourite sons.
And before we wrap the episode, John, we should let everybody know as well that your beautiful newsletter is coming out every week at the moment. So if anybody, what can people expect in the newsletter, John?
The newsletter is really an opportunity to do a bit of a deeper dive. Sometimes it'll make you laugh. Sometimes it'll make you think. More often than not, it'll make you laugh and then think, or think and then laugh. It's a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the stuff we're exploring in these conversations, a chance to revisit things that have been on my mind or your mind. And jokes aside, I do love writing it, and I love the comments and responses that we get to it. So if you are interested, go to dptm.org and just enter your email address there, and you'll get the next newsletter in your hot little hands. They come out every Thursday, and I spend sometimes all night the previous night crafting them for your pleasure.
Beautiful. DPTM, www.dptm.org for the newsletter subscription. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everybody. And we can't wait to see you next week.
The podcast.